Good day, everyone, and welcome once again to one of our, what we call sharing the learning dialogues. And I'm really pleased that I have colleagues Patricia and Julie, and we'll be talking about living with long-term conditions in the community. And it's about self-empowerment and what kind of strategies that can be deployed by communities, by individuals. So thank you very much. And Patricia, I'd just like to pass straight over to you, and good morning.
Good morning. Thanks very much, Rudy. And thanks everybody for listening in. My name is Patricia Smith. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of East London. I'm a physiotherapist by background. I have worked for many years with the NHS as a community physiotherapist before I went into academia, into teaching physiotherapy and public health at the University of East London. I've worked a lot with patients with chronic long-term conditions, and also have taught the subject at the university. So I'm here happy to share with you some of the insights that I have gained over the past few months, and would just like to share that with you. So thanks very much for listening. I hand over to Julie.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I am Julie Botticello. I'm also, like Patricia, a senior lecturer in public health at the University of East London. And my focus, I come more from an academic perspective. I've sort of done research with local communities, trying to understand their knowledge bases and how those local communities are empowered around their own health practices. So looking to sort of shifting into the community, sort of away from the NHS, or at least in complementary relationship with that. So we've done some projects together over the last couple of months. So it's very exciting for us here now to be broadcasting and engaging with you all. So thanks again for joining us. So we have a few slides. So I'm going to take the lead of the screen share lady. And so I'm going to share my slides and just get that in the right spot. And away we go. So basically, just to give you a reminder, we're looking at leadership through self-empowerment and care for people with long-term conditions in the community. So really trying to focus on that community aspect of care. So this is me going to be talking about chronic conditions and the wider determinants of health and the role of public health. So when we think about public health and population health, you might have heard these terms like in the media and on the news, and you might just be a bit confused, like what are we talking about? So really population health is really just like getting a measure for what are the illnesses, or what's the relative condition of the health of the population, who's, what things are circulating now, what are long-term conditions as well, and where do they lie? Like, do some groups bear more burden for certain illnesses than others? And then public health in many ways is really the actions to try and prevent illness, or to protect people, or to promote health and well-being. So it's really more like a verb. Public health is like, what can we do as actions? And I'd say also like the organizations and practices that promote health are also kind of connected to public health. So it's really a very active thing. And just really thinking about yourself, like kind of think, oh, where do I sit in this? And even though you may not work in health, you may talk, obviously you talk with colleagues or talk with family about health and public health in terms of like what's going around, but also what are the actions that we take on a daily basis to improve our health and well-being and those of our family and friends. Chronic diseases, now you probably may be quite familiar with this. Sometimes they're known as non-communicable diseases. That means they don't spread like in the same way that COVID spreads through passing breathing. Chronic conditions are not transferable in that way, and they can come around from a variety of different factors, like through your genes, through your environmental conditions, sometimes our behavior. So there's different ways that you can come, chronic diseases can kind of come into our lives. And some common ones, I guess, like diabetes is quite a common one. Stroke, recovering from stroke, arthritis, COPD, frailty, sort of like there's quite a lot of like, long-term conditions, basically, things that, don't go away quickly. I guess really that's the thing. So if you think about what's the ones that you most encounter in your work or in your life, maybe that's way of kind of thinking what's relevant and important to you and in your sphere. So this is really a busy slide, so forgive me for the busy slide. I just want to sort of share actually that, chronic disease, it's really responsible for a lot of sickness and death globally. So nearly 3/4 of all the deaths globally are caused by chronic disease. So not infections, but really chronic illnesses. And many people, especially younger people globally, die from chronic disease. They die too early. So in the age range between 30 and 69, many people are dying young from chronic conditions. And even in the UK on this side, you can see 89% of deaths in the UK are chronic conditions. And differently, most chronic conditions are in older people in the UK. So it's a slight difference from the global picture. But both, whether in the global picture or in the UK picture, people, if you live in conditions where your environment isn't very good, you don't have access to green spaces, the air isn't very fresh, the food choices that you have are quite limited, don't feel safe going out walking, all those things, and then maybe don't have a lot of money or can be education, a limited amount of education, and that can also impact on your literacy around health. All those things also impact to contribute to the rise of chronic diseases and becoming sick or actually approaching illness and death. Sometimes you'll hear things like these, like risk factors. So these are things like, to do with exposure. Like I said, sometimes you might be in a really polluted environment, so that's a risk factor. Sometimes it's like I said, the food choices aren't that good, or you don't have enough money to buy the really healthy choice. You end up buying a slightly more unhealthy choice, but it gives you more energy. And so sometimes these risk factors, so you can see on the left here, there's a bunch that we kind of like common, you kind of hear it a lot in the news around tobacco use or alcohol or high salt diets or not having enough physical activity. So those kind of things you kind of see often, we think, those are related to individuals, their poor actions. But in many ways, actually, our choices are, we don't have a range of, we don't choose everything we could possibly want. We don't have that possibility to just make every choice we'd like to make. And sometimes, people smoke because of the nicotine helps with stress, same, alcohol and even like maybe not having enough physical activity. It could be like there's, have a lack of time and things like that. So sometimes you have to sort of put this in perspective as to what else is going on in our lives. And I bracketed out air pollution because in some ways that's just a consequence of where we live. And, so sometimes we're not able even to make any adjustment on that. And then these modifiable factors have outcomes in terms of maybe you have high blood pressure, or you may be overweight or be dealing with obesity. Sometimes you might have a high blood sugar or high levels of fat in your blood. So these risk factors can then kind of translate into conditions that you carry in your body. You may have heard of this term called the social determinants of health. And this is like, I guess it's a theory really that's trying to explain that actually it isn't just us and our choices that we make in life that contribute to whether we are well or whether we have long-term illnesses, but like she's trying to understand like the bigger factors of like our support systems, how we where we grew up, where we, what we learned in school, like what kind of stress our work gives to us. Do we get any chance to play or have a break time? Do we have community through worship? And again, also how old we are, how long we've been on this planet. So a lot of these all have an impact on our ability to be well. And it doesn't necessarily mean not to have any illness, but just to be able to manage our illnesses and feel support of a community. And also in addition to supporting ourselves with our illnesses, sort of managing that, but perhaps even improving our condition as well, because feeling empowered or gaining empowerment so that we're in control of our lives and our health and well-being. And I just wonder if you've heard about this model, if you operate according to this model at all? When you think about when you're feeling unwell, or if you have a chronic condition, do you think about this wider picture, or do you end up blaming situations or people or yourself? And really, I think it's important to kind of think about the wider conditions, and then we can actually try and do something about those wider conditions. They are modifiable as well. They require effort, and they require like policy, and they require bigger changes. So it's not just on individuals, but bigger changes in society. Just to give you a sense of what the social determinants of health sort of show. So there was a report in 2010, just before the pandemic, by a person called Michael Marmot. He's kind of looks at disease statistics and life expectancy. And so he noted in the last 10 years, between 2010 and 2020, life expectancy in England had just stalled. It hadn't increased. In some areas, in poorer parts of the country, life expectancies actually got worse. And then there's this thing called the gradient in healthy life expectancy, really meaning that if you live in a poorer area, you're going to have a shorter life. And then of that shorter life, you may be in poorer health for longer. So that's one of these, like, it's an inequity. It's not social, it's not acceptable. And that's why really trying to like highlight this aspect of the social determinants of health. It isn't about individuals necessarily and their choices, but this bigger picture, and society is responsible for that bigger picture. So that's where we're trying to highlight that these things can be changed and people can be healthier. So again, it's just important to note as well, like you talk about poverty, but obviously poverty can be connected to other things around your gender, your sexuality, your gender identity, your ethnicity, your race, and your levels of ability or disability, and racism, and all these things kind of impact on these inequalities for different groups. So again, it's not just as simple as rich or poor, but there's a load of intersecting factors that also come in that play a big role. So finally, there's, in terms of my presentation, there's this model which has come out like in the early 90s, and it's called the rainbow model, and it really looks at the relationship between ourselves right in that center, and the various levels that we're connected in the world or in our societies to, that first level, the orange level, sort of choices that we make. That second yellow level is who are our friends, what are our networks, again, going back to, where do we work, or who do we play with, who do we worship with, how can we be influenced positively and or negatively potentially by those conditions, by that. And then in the level above, our work environment, are we at risk when we go to work? Is there, is there pollution? Do we put ourselves at risk? Are we being exposed to diseases? Are we employed or unemployed? Do we have access to health services? Do we know how to access our health services? Do they, respect us when we come? Things like that. So these are another layer. And then that big top layer in purple is really about, policies and funding and, support to local authorities coming from, the government. So making those choices about who needs support and where that, where we put money to help improve societal well-being. And that means community and individual well-being as well. So finally, the last thing just to sort of think about as I end my bit is what can I do to improve awareness of the social determinants of health? So like really trying to understand bigger than just myself and my illness, but actually what are the contributing factors? Where am I in this in terms of equalities or inequalities? How are they impacting? And once I have that realization, then I end up being more empowered about my situation and having more control. And then being able to do something about it. So anyway, thank you for listening. And I'm going to pass over now to Patricia.
Thanks very much, Julie, for that introduction, sort of setting the scene for understanding health and well-being from a public health perspective, and understanding that there are several factors which impacts on a person's well-being and their health. I'm going to pick up on that and go a little bit further to look at it from almost like an individual perspective, but that person, that individual who is part of a community and part of a system as well. So I'm going to be looking a little bit at some self-help strategies and self-empowerment through physical activity and exercise for chronic health conditions. I'm sure you've heard several times that people say, you need to exercise, you need to exercise. It's important to get up and exercise, especially during the recent lockdown where people were not able to get out and about and do things as much as possible. And that lack of activity actually had a negative impact on some people, especially people who had chronic long-term conditions, underlying conditions which were triggered by inactivity. So today, I'm just going to share a few ideas around that. So let's look at the next slide, which talks about what comes to your mind immediately when you see the following words. And I'm just going to flash a few words in front of you and give you a little bit of a time to think about it. Think about it. Okay, so we see exercise, physical activity, health, and power. These are sort of words that we come across on a day-to-day basis. Exercise, okay, what comes to mind when you think of exercise? Probably people say, oh God, no time, or sweat, effort. Oh, you know, it's just boring. It might be walking, it might be, you know, just doing something that's very rigid or regimental. So exercise, the thought of exercise can sometimes be a bit problematic for some people, while other people might think, oh, fun, activity, you know, it's an opportunity for me to do something different, right? When you think of the word physical activity, people might say things like, okay, I'm going to go for a walk, I'm going to ride my bicycle, I'm going to climb up the stairs, come down the stairs, I'm going to go for a swim, I'm going to go to the shops, I'm going to go to the post office. And, you know, physical activity sort of engenders within it some sort of exercise or something that's not rigid, but linked to some sort of activity that you're doing, some sort of activity of daily living, something functional that allows you to achieve a particular goal and not just say, sit down and, you know, lift your leg up and down 10 times or lift dumbbells 10 times. So there's a slight overlap between exercise and physical activity. Probably it's difficult to separate the two. Now, when you look at the word health, what comes into mind? Health, you might be thinking about wider things. Julie talked about the social determinants of health and the different factors which can impact on someone's health. So you're not just looking at the physical things or the things that affects your body physically, but the environment, your mental health, your social health, you know, emotional and psychological things that can actually impact on your health. Julie mentioned things around stress, and we live in a very an environment which causes us to have a really stressful response to a lot of the things around us. And a lot of times that sort of stress response comes out of maybe not understanding or being empowered or not educated sufficiently on our own health and well-being, and can be a lot of factors. It can be political, you know, or just not having the resources in order to make the decisions you need about your own health and well-being. So health tends to have a wider philosophical understanding, right? So let's look at the word power. Now, power is so important because everybody wants power. What is power? We can look at it very scientifically. Power is ability to do work, I suppose, if you're looking at it from a very mathematical perspective. But it comes a little bit more than that, because power is being able to probably make decisions, make choices, having a certain level of control over your life, and being able to be self-determinant, being able to do things that you need to do to achieve your own goals in life and allow you to be self-sufficient, so to speak. So when we talk about these 4 ideas, it's something that we want to develop as individuals, but also as part of a community, part of a system, which Rudy will speak about a little bit later on when we talk about neighborhoods. But I thought I'd just introduce this to you so that you could think about these different ideas and how it impacts on you. So let's move on now and see how this translates into what happens in the healthcare system. Some of you might be frontline workers, some of you might be managers, some of you might be care providers. There's a whole range of people who work within the healthcare system. And traditionally, we have grown up in a system which is heavily directed by what we call the biomedical model of health, where, you're sick, you go into hospital, you're observed, you're given medication, and you are cured. And it's a very sort of, if you look at it sort of theoretically, it's been sort of described in the literature as a very reductionist, top-down, dualistic, sort of individualistic approach to health. And it's a sort of you fix me approach, and there's, it has its place, and I'm not saying that that shouldn't happen. But when we look at health in the current climate that we live in, Judy mentioned the environment, pollution, stress, cost of living increasing, so many things, the psychological and family problems, as well as the pathological issues that we have to deal with. We find that sometimes the biomedical model may not address all the issues that affect someone's health and well-being. So that is something I just wanted us to look at, so that we can see how we can have a change in perspective, which will allow us to be self-empowered and to develop the kind of strategies which enables us to have good health. Okay, so let's look at the other slide. Now, this is another model which was developed by Engel. Now, he looked at this model called a biopsychosocial model of health, which is slightly different from the biomedical model, in that it looks at other aspects of health. We talked about the physical, which is about the biological, genetic, and nutritional state of somebody's body. And that's fine, because we have to identify certain pathologies which can give rise to certain conditions. Julie talked about modifiable situations and chronic non-modifiable conditions. And a lot of times the modifiable ones are things that you can do for yourself in terms of lifestyle, in terms of choices, in terms of changes that you can make in order to address some of these biological problems that you have, or we have. So there's an overlap between the biological, genetic, and nutritional problems with the emotional and behavioral conditions that we find ourselves in. And that's the psychological, because we cannot dissociate body, mind, and spirit. We've heard that before, that you're not just a body, but you have a mind, you have a spirit, there's a mental part of you which impacts on how you think, what you believe, your attitudes, certain behaviors that you might adopt, and it's also linked to our cultural heritage as well, and also other things that we inherit. And then there's also the social environment, because we don't live in isolation. We don't live by ourselves. We live as part of a community. We live as part of a family. And these things can impact on what we think about ourselves, what we believe about ourselves, what we can do or cannot do. So there's stress, there's trauma, and there's environment. A lot of us have been traumatized. And we carry that trauma with us in throughout life, and that trauma can affect the decisions we make about our health. So the biopsychosocial model overlaps all these three ideas in order to look at what's happening with someone's health and well-being. So if we look at the next slide, we look at a comparison between the biomedical model, the biopsychosocial model. We see that the biomedical model is a very disease-oriented model, which, as I said, has its place, but may not necessarily answer all the questions that people have about their health. So in the biomedical model, there's a disease approach where there's some sort of intervention where you identify the problem, which we call an etiology, make a diagnosis, and then there's an intervention. Whereas in the biopsychosocial model, we're talking about an experience, an illness experience. And part of that experience is a physical tension or pain that you might have in your body. But what does that mean for you? How does that affect your ability to make decisions? How does that affect your ability to relate to your family, to go out, to function in society? So there are social factors, there are biological factors, and there are psychological factors. And that is what we want to talk about when we talk about self-empowerment, self-help strategies, self-care. And let's look at the next slide. And in the next slide, it looks at what we call the self-empowerment and self-efficacy model. And this is a process model because people who have what we call a positive self-efficacy, meaning that they are able to, they have a strong belief about their ability to make decisions, to make choices, and to shift their condition in such a way that they can get positive results. And a lot of times people with this very positive, strong self-efficacy have what we call an strong internal locus of control, where they are not blaming others, you know, that blame model, blaming others for what happens to them. Oh, I'm ill because of what you did, or because I haven't got access to so-and-so, or because I can't do so, oh, poor old me. And I'm sort of exaggerating a little bit just to give you an idea of what that internal locus of control is. But as somebody who says, okay, this is a problem, this is what I need now to do, I'm going to research, I'm going to educate myself, that health education, I'm going to do a bit of research, I'm going to look what's out there, I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to make changes. Somebody who has a poor self-efficacy tend to lack confidence, lack the belief and understanding that they are able to make those changes, and therefore depends on others to do for them. And such a person has what we call an external locus of control, where they are depending on the environment and people to make the changes for them. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there isn't a responsibility of the healthcare system, the community, and other people to provide the resources. But what I'm really trying to say is that there has to be a partnership, a working together in order to be able to understand what's available to you and to be able to make the right kind of choices, the decisions that empowers you to help yourself. So this model has identified three main things. It's about identifying or looking at goals and objectives. What are your goals? What is it that you want to achieve for yourself? Some of us have difficulty knowing what we want. Some of us don't really know what we want. And partly it's because we've not really looked at where we are, what the problem is, or it might be fear. Sometimes we're fearful about making steps because we're unsure. Then the other thing is about carrying out actions towards these goal achievements. So that's where that's a social context. And then it's about observing and reflecting on the impact of those actions in reflection to the goal that you've changed, that you've attained. So this self-empowerment, self-efficacy model is a useful model to help the individual to identify goals and patterns of behavior that will help them to become empowered, take control, make decisions and choices that are within, that benefits them, their family, and also helps the community. So let's look at this last slide. I think there's a last slide here, or about your thoughts. It's always good to be able to have your thoughts and to think about how these two models work for people with long-term chronic conditions. This is very important because somebody with a long-term chronic condition has been living with a condition which has impacted not only their physical being, but also their mental and emotional state. It's impacted them on their function, their activities of daily living, their ability probably to earn a living, their ability to just do things that allows them to have a quality of life, which brings happiness to them, you know? So, you know, it's good to think about these things. Julie mentioned some chronic conditions such as diabetes. I've worked a lot with patients who've had diabetes in terms of physical activity and so forth. You know, there are COPD, there's Alzheimer's, dementia, you know, there's a whole host of chronic conditions, long-term conditions. And what you'll find is that a lot of these conditions are overlap with other illnesses, such as high blood pressure, you know, and so forth. So it's important to look at the public health perspective, the professional health perspective, and also the policy development and facilitation perspectives, which Rudy will talk a little bit more about when we talk about communities, neighborhoods, and the systems approach. And last slide, I think this is my last slide. We're going to just reflect a little bit. Now, this is about you reflecting on your own personal situation. Some of you might, who are listening out there, might actually be living with a long-term condition. This is a good time for you to reflect on how you and your community can become more empowered in self-care practices. How to become more empowered in self-care practices. Remember, self-care practice is about you. You are at the center of your practice, and you can harness and bring around you people that can assist and help you. And a lot of that lies in the family, in the community, and in your ability to make choices. So I'll leave that with you for the time being as I hand over to Rudy, who's going to take us a little bit further. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Patricia. And thank you, Julie. So we're going to talk about what we call the trusted messenger model. Thank you, Julie. And what we've done here over the last few months, one thing, what we have learned from the pandemic, there has to be a paradigm shift in the way our community goes about improving their health. But most importantly is how we collaborate. And if you think back to some of the things that Julie and Patricia have been saying, it does sound quite complex, but we do have people in our communities, and specifically in the African and Caribbean population groups, where there has been challenges around self-care and community involvement. There are GPs, there are faith leaders, there are community pharmacists. There's many people working in the system, in the health system. We've got lots of community champions. And one of the challenges that we do face, but we can overcome, is what is the strategy for improving our community's health? So thank you, Julie. So one of the important messages that has come out of the pandemic activities is what we say is workforce is the community is the workforce. We've got lots of people in the community, and in fact all of us are members of the community at some point in our lives, but the point is that by getting the workforce and the community together and collaborating in their neighborhoods, in their local communities, the churches, you know, and other places where the community gathers, we can use those areas for sharing and learning. Thank you, Julie. And how we have gone about that has been quite simple, really. Dialogues, and this is a good example of the dialogues, but these dialogues have taken place in our local churches. They have taken place with our community pharmacies. As you will know, community pharmacies stayed open throughout the whole of the pandemic, but increasingly now they are outreaching into the communities. They have community champions as well, and community champions can be anybody from our community who have an interest in connecting. So we have lots of community connectors who are willing to show people where their local sports clubs are, local activities, and all these are going on in our neighborhoods. So the promotion of the community assets that are in our neighborhoods is an essential part of our activities these days. The focus on community wellness is really important as well, because again, as has been stated already, that's just about our mental health, emotional health, those social interactions, which are really important. And some of the key emerging themes that have come up from this over recent times is that it's finding ways to increase the self-care awareness, access and pathways. So for example, in our communities, we have lots of community providers, and a platform like this is starting to help the community to understand some of the more complex ideas and the complex thinking that is behind the decisions that are made in the community. And our role, I guess, is to make this much more accessible. And this is a good example of that. We've spoken about our trusted messengers. Again, people working in the NHS, they're working in the health system, public health systems, but also they are involved in our neighborhoods and in our local communities. And we do have to take into consideration, and we do take into consideration that not everybody is the same social, education, economic circumstances, and we have to be mindful of that and to care about that as well. And increasingly, these kind of support mechanisms are available in our neighborhoods, in our local communities. Thank you, Julie. And here's some examples. These particular examples are from Haringey, and these, again, you know, we've had dialogues focusing on women and their healthy living and lifestyles. The same with men as well, in terms of, when you talk about men, particularly in the African Caribbean population groups where prostate health is of significant concern. Diabetes, of course, is another major concern, both for men and women in those particular population groups. And some of the challenges about dealing with that in the long term has already been outlined by both Julie and particularly what Patricia was saying. And the good thing is that there are people within our communities now willing to assist and to support. The assistance and the support is there. So the community empowerment, the community involvement, which is essential, is taking place, and there's lots of access points. And once you get access, there's lots of pathways, and people can really go at the speed that they're most comfortable at. Thank you, Julie. And some examples, what's happened in Haringey of recent times. You know, there's been activities with Morrison's community. Again, Patricia mentioned it. There's something about being able to go out into your neighborhood, that social interaction, feeling happy, listening to music, associating with other people. That's really important. And I think it's only when you go out and about and you associate with your community and that social action and what that can do for your emotional and mental well-being, it's really important. And again, this big focus on healthy neighborhoods, and we're linking the healthy neighborhoods at the same time. It's about community empowerment, and that's a good thing, very much as what Julie and Patricia have been saying. It's about community empowerment, and even the way this knowledge is being shared today, it's about promoting healthy lifestyles. Patricia's said a lot about that, the long-term conditions. That's just a fact of life that we have them. And it's about promoting well-being. There's lots of things that we can do to improve our well-being. And of course, it's important to support vulnerable groups, because it's not about blaming anyone for their condition. As was outlined at the very beginning by Julie, there's lots of reasons why that any of us at any time can become vulnerable anyway. And that's just a fact of life. Thank you, Julie. And then our reflection is, how can facilitation improve community empowerment and create healthier neighborhoods? And that, again, that's about that self-care, that caring, and what we talk about promoting inclusive, peaceful, caring, and enterprising neighborhoods. Thank you for that. So, Patricia and Julie, I'm going to leave the two of you to do a summary, the overall summary. And if there's any key points that you feel people should also take into consideration, then we'd be happy to hear that as well.
Okay. I can make a quick start. Yeah, so just have some
ahead.
thoughts. So I think one of the things that's come up for me through our session in the sense of community, and Rudy mentioned it, and Patricia, you also mentioned this, that, you know, we are the community, right? We're not separate from community, no matter whether we work as a doctor in the system, or whether we are a porter in the system, or whether we don't work in the healthcare system at all, but we just are a member of, you know, we live in the neighborhood. That's community, and every one of us is a member of community. And I think it's a resource that has been whittled away perhaps over the last few years, and the resurgence of, in a way, COVID also created that awareness that we really need community, and the community have really rallied in terms of supporting one another for many things, just taking people out for walks, making sure they have food and things like that. And so I think that shift has helped us, as Rudy mentioned, a paradigm shift. We're shifting away from the selfish model of health and that individual blame model of health that Patricia was highlighting, to a more community focused. How can we empowered together, you know, make change that supports everyone? And I think for me, that's really one of the biggest positive takeaways from our learning together, in terms of sharing this learning, that we have power as a community in our communities, and we're members of those communities from, you know, just by existing and being here and breathing the same air. And I think we need to really embrace that and recognize how we can also bring about political change that's also needed as well to help support health and well-being, particularly, as Rudy was saying, amongst those most vulnerable, because it, you know, not only could it be us, but it's also important to support the most vulnerable, because that makes a good society, right?
Okay, thanks. I think you've done it for me, Julie. Okay, I'll just add a little bit more to what Julia said. Thanks very much. I agree with what Julia said, and thanks, Rudy, for just setting that community empowerment at the center of everything, because as you said, we are the community and the community is us, but also the fact that there's an interdependence between myself and the community. I can't live without the community, and the community needs me. So we've got to work in partnership and together in supporting each other, and working with each other, and understanding that that collectivity, that collectiveness, that being able to work as a collective produces such better results than working as an individual, because we are individuals in the sense that we've got individual ideas, but we are not separate from each other. We're actually united and in one, but we've got to be able to express that in a way that allows us to be empowered, allows us to walk and to help each other and to help ourselves. So I think that the takeaway is about, that community empowerment through self-empowerment, through understanding and caring for ourselves and for each other.
Thank you very much. And I would just like to say thank you both for an inspiring and enlightening dialogue.
Thank you so much for having us, Rudy. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy.
And thanks to the listeners as well.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, my team here, our collaborators. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.